When I was a little girl, my family went to church 1 hour every week, unless you were really sick or there was a big snowstorm. And our church service was all in grown-up language. It was hard for me to sit still, but my sister and I learned to sit quietly and look at a book, even though we didn't understand a lot of what was going on. Over all the years that we were growing up, we had that weekly experience of the adults around us setting aside an hour of their lives every week for contemplation and prayer. When my mom was a little girl, and that was a long time ago, her family went to church 1 hour per week, but then the church service was in Latin. How many of us here understand Latin? Wow. Some people study it, but most people don't understand it. Do you think if we had our worship service here today in Latin, or in any language you couldn't understand, that it might be difficult, especially for the younger people among us, to sit quietly for an hour? I suspect some of us may feel bored. So in Unitarian Universalist churches, we usually share the first part of our service with the kids and the grown-ups, and then the kids leave to go do some learning that's more engaging for kid brains. But every once in a while, like today, we ask our kids to stay for the whole service, and sometimes they might get a little bored. And today the kids might be thinking about finding Easter eggs after the service and might feel a little extra wiggly. And grown-ups might feel a little wiggly too. And sometimes it's okay to feel wiggly or maybe even a little bit bored and ready to get up and run around. But still, we adults and children alike, it's good for us to come together once a week for an hour to sit and be still with our hearts. We set this time apart to consider what we're grateful for, what is scary, what we're sad or worried about, who hurt our feelings, and what we can imagine and what we hope for. We gather together with other people and we all agree on our covenants to be kind to one another, to listen, to include everyone, and to help one another. We make this old building, as old as me, into a special place where we are safe to be whoever we are. And by showing up here together again and again, we build what we call beloved community. Human beings, people, are wired in our brains to be together, to work together, and to share with each other. Just like geese and wolf packs and monkeys, we are social animals and we need one another. Unless you have an amazing garden, probably someone you never met grew the food that you ate this morning. Probably many people built the house or apartment building that you're living in. And did you build your car, Kyle? Did you pump the crude oil out of the ground and refine it into gasoline? Or if you rode the bus, did you drive the city bus to get here? There is one bus driver among us. I'm pretty sure every single one of us, though, is reliant on other people to do things like build our cars and our houses and grow at least some of our food. We are all tied together, and not just for the things that we need to survive. We also need to tell someone when something great happens. My daughter just moved out, and I painted her old room, and I moved into the first home office I've ever had. Now, that might not sound that exciting to you, but when Reverend Alwyn came over for a meeting at my house the other day, I invited her into my new office and showed it to her like a kid with a new toy. Having a home office is a grown-up toy. And I couldn't wait to show somebody. Sharing our excitement and our joy is a human need. And then there are the times that we're sad. Sometimes we tell the people in our family or our friends at church about being sad that our bunny died or somebody hurt our feelings or that we're worried about something. Here at church, we call that joys and sorrows, and we light candles and write them in our book. and share them with each other, because this is how we get to know each other and trust one another. And again, it's how we build beloved community, by caring about each other. So thousands of years ago, before cars and phones and computers, people lived most of their lives outdoors, and they really knew that they needed each other to survive. Some of them went out to hunt for food, some grew gardens or collected berries, some took care of children or prepared the food or made the clothes. Everybody had their job, children and adults, and they knew that the seasons were going to change, and depending on where they lived, they knew that to live in nature, they needed to be ready for storms or for cold or times that the food didn't grow. People invented language so they could talk to each other. And they invented myths and legends and creation stories to explain the world around them. They also made parties and rituals and celebrations and feasts so that they could have some fun. Living before cars and central heat and air conditioners and supermarkets and sinks and toilets was rough, and people needed to dance around the fire and to tell stories and sing and celebrate. So when Dory read for us today the story of Ostara, goddess of rabbits and birds and springtime, we know that stories like that were made up by people trying to understand the natural world and the cycles of birth and death and rebirth. Now, the word pagan means country dweller. And when the Christian church built massive cathedrals in Europe 1,000 years ago, that's churches, big churches, the pagans, or the country dwellers, would walk long distances to see these incredible cathedrals with stained glass windows and statues and amazing woodwork like nothing they had ever seen before. The bishops and the clergy wanted those pagans to join the church, so they did everything they could to encourage the pagans to believe in their religion, Christianity. And one pretty easy way to do that was to take stories from the Bible, the Christian holy book, and celebrate Christian stories with some of the ancient pagan traditions woven in. So Jesus' birthday came to be celebrated near the winter solstice, or Yule, and the Christians adopted the ancient traditions of kissing under the mistletoe, caroling, wreaths of holly and ivy and evergreen, and even gift giving. All of those things had been done by pagans for centuries. So when it came to the Christian story of Jesus, the holy man and teacher who was killed for his radical ideas, the story goes that 3 days later, he rose from the dead. Coming back from the dead is called resurrection. But we don't have to die to be resurrected. Sometimes we can be hiding or grieving or sick or hurt, and then we can come back renewed and different than we were before. This is also resurrection. So the Christian church decided to celebrate Jesus' resurrection when the pagans were celebrating Ostara, the first day of spring. They even named their Christian holiday Easter after Ostara. And they adopted rabbits and decorating eggs and hiding them, and even hot cross buns from the country-dwelling pagans. And while Easter is for some Christians the most holy celebration of the year, for Unitarian Universalists, we have all sorts of relationships with Easter. Before I was born, Unitarians and Universalists were Christians. As Unitarian Universalists, this is our religious heritage. But most of the grown-ups in this room were not raised UU. We come from Christian and Jewish and Hindu and Muslim traditions, as well as many of us who didn't grow up with a religious tradition. Some of us celebrate Easter as a time to get together with our extended families and eat some food and be together. Because whether our grandparents or families of origin were Christian or not, many of us celebrate Easter with chocolate bunnies and decorating eggs and hiding them, and maybe a new stuffed animal or a new fidget or a whole load of candy and treats. My family always eats ham on Easter and other special foods. And if you know what ham is made of, don't tell my pet pig Maisie. I think that might upset her a bit. So we gather today as Unitarian Universalists, and every single UU church and every single UU minister spends Easter asking, what does Easter mean to us? As UUs, we know that that question will never be answered and will always be unfolding. We know that for Jewish people, this week is also Passover or Pesach. Here at our church, we have a Seder ritual to celebrate Passover, where people will sit around a table here in our sanctuary and eat and pray and drink wine and sing and talk about social justice and tell stories as prescribed by the holy book called the Haggadah. Passover teaches Jewish people about faith and the need to have faith in God even if they find themselves in a difficult situation. Passover reminds Jewish people to embrace and realize the true value of freedom. Pagans today celebrate new life and fertility and abundance at this time, and Christian traditions and stories this time of year consider ideas of renewal, resurrection, forgiveness, and starting again. Now, our UU roots are from the Protestant tradition, and we often use this time of year to consider resurrection. We consider the rebirth of nature, resurrecting our hopes and dreams, or even resurrecting dead relationships. When I think about resurrection in the context of this church, I can't help but think about the difficult time that we just went through with the pandemic and social distancing. But lately, this growing and vibrant community seems to be having a resurrection. Today, let us rejoice and be glad that this spiritual community has come through all sorts of hardships and hurts and hard times, even before the pandemic, and yet, in 2 weeks, we will celebrate 30 years of Columbine UU Church. And just like our pagan ancestors discovered, it is important to our mental health as human beings to take breaks from our daily lives and celebrate together. Today, some of us dressed up in spring colors, and I was going to say Easter hats, but I don't actually see an Easter hat. Today we take a little, Maisie has an Easter hat though. We're going to put that on her today. Today we take a little time to celebrate our emergence from the hibernation of winter too. This time reminds us to notice the buds on the trees and the tulips and daffodils starting to emerge, and remember to let that beauty and renewal and resurrection of nature all around us give us joy. We need joy because there's so much hard stuff. Now, we aren't scrabbling to survive the harsh winters like the ancient pagan people, but we are struggling to survive violence and oppression that shows up all around us, in our schools, in our public places. And we are still in need of the message of Easter and renewal and resurrection, and we still need to have parties. So while Easter isn't simple for UUs, renewal and hope is simple. Inclusion of our children and all of us who come from such a variety of religious and cultural traditions is part of what we do this time of year. Today we celebrate both the complexity and the simplicity of Easter and the richness that comes when we are free to share our whole selves with each other. May this day and this season and this church live into the fullness of joy and togetherness, tending to both our roots and our wings. Blessed be, and may it be so.